Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. Welcome to the QlikView, the 10 Things I Wish I Knew When I Started webinar, hosted by the ClearLine group. Before we get started, I'd like to cover some housekeeping. We have 45 minutes blocked out for this webinar, so we should have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. During the webinar, everybody's going to be on mute. We welcome questions, and during the webinar, you can ask via the Q&A button on your live meeting screen. At the end of the presentation, we will unmute your phone so you can ask questions. We will be recording this webinar for future playback at clearlinegroup.com so you can review or forward to your colleagues. With that, I'd like to review the agenda. We're going to go through some brief introductions here in a moment, and then we'll kick off the actual presentation by giving an overview of QlikView. Assuming most of you people on the phone are familiar with QlikView, maybe our user, but have familiarity, so we'll do a brief overview. And then we're going to go into the crux of the webinar, which is the 10 things I wish I knew when I started to use QlikView. And at the end, now that you know the 10 things, we're going to talk about what do you do next, followed by question and answer. So let's jump into some introductions here. My name is John Schmidt. I'm Vice President of Business Development here at ClearLine Group. I have over 20 years of technology experience in sales and in pre-sales consulting. I've worked at organizations such as QlikTech, Siebel, Hyperion, and NCR Teradata. I have a pretty broad background in data warehousing and business intelligence. And joining me on the webinar here today is Rob Wozniak, who's an architect here in ClearLine's business intelligence practice. And Rob also has very broad and deep background in business intelligence and data warehousing, both from the business side and also from the technology side. Rob is well versed in the entire, I would call it the data warehousing stack, everywhere from QlikView to ETL to data warehousing and business objects. And he's got a broad industry background experience working in the pharmaceutical industry all the way through to manufacturing. Today's webinar is actually sponsored by the ClearLine Group. We're a boutique consulting firm of highly experienced business intelligence and enterprise performance management experts. We are a QlikView partner, and we're headquartered out of Illinois. And the key here is the core team has been around and been working together for more than 12 years on and off, and we provide a blend of both industry and technology expertise, just like Rob. The breadth of the skills are all from expert level, from advisory services, all the way from architecture and implementation. And we're all full-time employees here, and our mantra is pretty simple. It's if our clients are successful, we're successful. So we're all focused on the long-term success of our clients and our organization. So with that, let's turn over to a brief overview of QlikView. And this next slide here, actually, I'll introduce Rob here in a second, but Rob put this together, and it's kind of a nice slide. I wish I would have came up with this, but it's I call it the I heart or I love QlikView slide. So why don't you tell me a little bit more background about this slide, Rob?
Yeah, sure, John. Thanks for that introduction. This is kind of like how I feel about QlikView, I guess, most days. It was like my first experience with QlikView 3.5-4 years ago. Realizing that you could deploy really cool-looking dashboards pretty easily, pretty quickly. Had a very intuitive interface. I love the associative data model, and all you really need to do to find out what you need is click in-memory architecture. That kind of grew on me. And you get used to that kind of instantaneous lightning-fast response time. I absolutely love it. When you read that, Gartner or some, really prestigious publication says, QlikTech belongs in the leader quadrant for business intelligence vendors. Also, more recently they're talking about data discovery, and just having that experience of implementing something for a client and having them go through the process of getting a really rapid return on their investment. So. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, so once again, I kind of wish I would have came up with this slide, but you kind of beat me to the punch. But this is the slide that I came up with, which is, kind of QlikView success. What happens when an organization, bites off on QlikView? And it kind of spreads, like wildfire throughout the organization. So if you think about it, sales gets a hold of it, they may start doing their forecasting accuracy, pulling data out of Salesforce.com, or looking at sales penetration or territory management. Then marketing finds out about it, starts doing some promotion effectiveness or lead management, and finance jumps on the bandwagon, doing cash flow projections, and operations, HR. So what happens is quickly, QlikView takes off within an organization, and the good news, that's the good news. The unfortunate news is sometimes it becomes a victim of its own success and kind of hits a brick wall. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about here today, is kind of the 10 things I wish I knew when I started, to kind of get beyond that brick wall and maximize your investment in QlikView. But, the big question here, Rob, kind of throw it over to you, is, how did this all happen?
Well, it's like, all of a sudden, every user's got, is empowered by QlikView, has got their own version of, what constitutes the truth. You got really cluttered dashboards that take forever to render, regardless of how much, hardware you seem to throw at it. Security problems, everybody sees everything, which is never a good situation. And then, worst of all is, you get an IT organization that is dead set against QlikView. And I've seen that happen many times, and it's a really kind of unfortunate situation.
Yeah, so that's going to kind of good transition and lead into kind of the 10 things I wish I knew when I started using QlikView, and kind of a brief background or evolution of the 10 things. It kind of came from both of our backgrounds and experience. Mine, like I talked about before, being in the data warehousing business intelligence industry for a while, and most recently being with the QlikTech organization, and you, Rob, working on a bunch of projects and rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty, and experience a lot of these. So why don't you expound upon that a little bit?
Yeah, I think most of this, like you pointed out, is really from just working with customers and kind of these quote unquote real world engagements, and seeing these kinds of issues firsthand, or experiencing these kinds of issues firsthand. There's also a lot of great sources for getting information about what's going on, getting details about what's going on. Includes there's a lot of good message boards for QlikView, including Qlik.com is really good. Qlik community. Also, we're always in discussions with partners and vendors, and so there's an element of learning from others' experience as well. But one thing I do want to bring up with regards to how we came to this list of 10 is that a lot of this stuff is long-standing. These are long-standing issues related to information technology, information delivery, and a lot of the same things that we've been dealing with now for decades are still there, are still issues. And QlikView, great technology, yes, but a lot of these long-standing issues, do not go away with the advent of QlikView.
Yeah, it's kind of an evolving list. This is what you and I kind of put together based on our experiences and the experiences we've had at our ClearLine group and stuff. But by all means, this is an end-all, be-all top 10 list for QlikView. I'm sure during this call, I'm sure people have some questions that may bring up some other things here. So why don't we just roll up our sleeves and jump into this. So the first issue, or the first thing I wish I would have known when I started using QlikView was, data discovery does not mean you don't have a business problem. Can you expound upon that a little bit, Rob?
Yeah, this is touching on this idea of, no one, at least in the business world, no one really is interested in technology for technology's sake. Everything needs some kind of rationale, some kind of business driver. So this is really saying it's a best practice to really identify what is that driver, what is that question you're trying to answer. As you go across industries, there are a number of issues, long-standing questions that people are still trying to answer, to gain insight towards. For instance, in pharmaceuticals, always worried, always concerned about, their advertising spend, and is that really having an impact on sales, or at least the impact that they're kind of assuming but don't know actually does. Retail, market basket, is the configuration of particular products placed one to the other, placed one, right next to the other. Does that have an impact on sales? Healthcare, everybody's looking at, profitability of a hospital, labor productivity. Certainly financial services, they're always concerned about questions of risk, of credit risk. Is this a worthy investment? So it's kind of like, there's got to be at least a problem domain, in order to secure enterprise justification as things get rolled out, as QlikView matures and becomes adopted by the organization. Really need to think about, okay, what is the justification for this, admittedly impressive piece of technology?
Yeah, and I think, a couple of key words on the slide here, what you talked about is kind of, nobody really gets paid to meander, and it's, you really can't justify bringing in a technology like QlikView without, solving some, or having some functional business issues that you're trying to solve. So I think the key here as a takeaway would be, is to have clear intentions of what information you want in your program to start. I mean, it's not like you have to document the heck out of them. It's just, make sure you kind of understand what you're doing. So when you actually go and try and calculate your return on investment to justify bringing QlikView in maybe the first time, or driving QlikView to be an enterprise solution, you're just not doing it for, as you mentioned earlier, you're just not looking at technology for technology's sake. So that drives us to kind of wish I would have known number 2. I wish I would have known, just because getting data into QlikView is so darn easy that it doesn't mean you shouldn't have a data architecture.
Right. This really points to the the kind of long-standing fact that issues with data integration, dirty data, invalid data, still to this day, even with QlikView, are the number one source of project delays and project holdups. Just to give you an example, I was working with a pharmaceutical. They wanted to integrate, their GL data with market share data, and also some data they had related to production of particular pharmaceutical products. And the stuff didn't integrate because it was all reflective of a different time period. And the bulk of the project was spent, doing the things that needed to happen to integrate that data so that it would all reflected the same, kind of viewpoint of different processes that are happening within that organization, that manufacturer. So that's another way of saying, as data comes in, as garbage comes in, that's what's going to come out of your system. And QlikView is no different in that regard. Dirty data always needs to be cleaned up before it can deliver value. And also, I just a quick mention, an interesting thing I saw. There are a number of methods that different kind of thought leaders have come up with over the years of dealing with a lot of these issues. These are when you hear terms like slowly changing dimensions, which is a Ralph Kimball, kind of innovation in the data warehousing world. There's things like MDM, master data management. All these things are kind of, technology independent, but they're still around. They're still in use because they make sense, because all these issues have come up before. And just recently on clickcommunity.com, I'm starting to see postings on, how do you do slowly changing dimensions in QlikView? Which is to say, that's an issue independent of technology. And now we're seeing, as QlikView gets more mature, we're seeing all these things now apply to QlikView as well.
Yeah, so kind of takeaway is what you're saying, Rob, is, it doesn't matter what the technology is, we're all talking about QlikView here today. But, as QlikView becomes more of an enterprise type of deployment stuff, the age-old, long-standing issues of data architecture apply. Mm-hmm. There's some terms up here like ETL and MDM and metadata that a lot of business users or people who've acquired QlikView may not understand, extract, transform, or load, and master data management or metadata management stuff. But the good news is, there are organizations like ourselves, or even with the your own IT organization, who understand these things and can help you as you move forward. So once again, I kind of wish I would have known some of this stuff ahead of time. So that brings us to issue number 3, that, I kind of wish I would have known that QlikView has its own specific needs in terms of an enterprise architecture. Can you help us out a little bit with that one, Rob?
Yeah, and I think that's really the idea encapsulated here is really, this willingness to be flexible in how we think about, a technology such as QlikView, which has its own specific architectural needs. When we talk about QlikView, we hear a lot about in-memory. It's an in-memory technology. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean we can have virtual or shared memory versus dedicated memory? How much memory do I need? Really understanding, who my target audience is, and how this technology applies to that target audience. QlikView's done a great job of providing a number of innovations for dealing with, its kind of unique architecture. So there's QVD loading, there's binary loading, loop and reduce to implement security. Publisher is a great addition to the stack. It enhances a lot of the kind of enterprise capabilities of QlikView, like being able to produce reports on a scheduled basis. But it's really cautions again, to be careful, because there's a lot of buzzwords that are thrown around out there, and don't mean the same thing for different vendors and different customers or clients. So QlikView has a support for something they call clustering. Also has support for something they're calling load balancing. So a number of other vendors will tell you they have the same thing, but actually when you start to understand it, work with it, it is not quite the same thing. Not to go into too much detail, but there is a type of load balancing, but it's not the same load balancing that you would understand if you were an engineer for Oracle Corporation or something like that. So that's just keeping in mind, really, you have to keep an open mind with this, any kind of new technology that comes along, and be willing to work with it.
Yeah, so kind of a takeaway here, kind of, I think we're getting a little bit old here. I've got some gray hair around here, but, it kind of reminds me of the old days of client server. When that first came out, there were some challenges there. People had to learn some things new with, doing a client server architecture. And then when the web architecture came out, there was web servers and application servers and Java and all this new stuff that came out that people had to get familiar with and learn the nuances. And then, today it's cloud and in-memory and big data and all this stuff. So I think the key here takeaway is, like any new technology, there's a learning curve. And I think one of the things that I've learned, and I'm sure you've learned as well, is with stuff like this, there's no black and white answer. So I think when it first came out, even like client server and stuff, people said, you got to do it this way. And I think people got themselves in some issues with QlikView deployments because they went and did something a specific way, as opposed to really looking at the business issue you're trying to solve and your current technology environment and the architecture of QlikView, and looking at all those together to deliver an enterprise application. So that brings us to number 4, which I wish I would have known that iterative development does not mean you don't need to productionalize.
Yeah, so I think the thing about QlikView, it really lends itself to this idea of rapid prototyping, which is like, you kind of develop something, you show it to a user, a group of users, they give you some feedback, and maybe you go back and kind of implement the feedback, do some testing, and present it again, and, repeat the cycle, a number of times, to, But at some point, there's always this idea. It's like, well, this thing is ready to go. And so at that point, it's like, there's this idea of productionalizing, making it ready for, wider consumption, which might be like, publishing to an access point that's open to the whole company, or, maybe if not the whole company, the whole department or the whole group of users. And so there's a whole series of concerns that arise when you go to take that kind of action. And usually, you're subject to some kind of standards, like at an enterprise level. So that might be, standards for security, standards for access. There might be, how standards for a data model, or how dashboards are arranged and what they look like and things of that nature. So really, it's just saying, that this sort of thing, this sort of, cleaning things up, getting them ready for production, still in effect, even with QlikView.
Yeah, and takeaway is kind of, it does, the nice thing about it allows for that quick application development and delivery. So you can get the feedback, really quick and tweak it. So if you look at a couple of the orange arrows on the slide here, you can keep doing the prototype review again and again and again, but when you're ready to kind of deploy this thing, you should, like you said, use the enterprise standards, the things we've learned in the past, to make sure this thing is buttoned down before we kind of deliver it out there to the enterprise. So that brings us to number 5. And I really like this one. It sounds trivial, but, I kind of wish I would have known, that training, even with QlikView, is still required.
Right, and I think this is getting at the perception that, QlikView is so easy to use. People will just intuitively grasp it and start using it. I mean, I think it's like true of anything, they'll start using it, but, maybe not using it to the fullest extent. And I think it also brings to mind, a couple things that aren't often talked about, in organizations, which is that, there's a spectrum of users, especially with QlikView. There's people who just want to, consume data, just get their number, just get their report. And there's people who really just want to be left alone and look at, just kind of clicking away and finding, all kinds of valuable information in the data. And of course, there's everyone who's in between somewhere. So also, I think QlikView, to a certain extent, represents a cultural change because they're introducing this concept of data discovery, which is distinct from reporting. Data discovery obviously implies that there's something additional that you don't know that's available via a tool like QlikView. So when you talk about things to train folks on, there's certainly the associative data model and how that works. That you select things and those are highlighted in green, and it shows you what's associated in white, and almost more importantly, what's not associated, it would be grayed out. And, what are the implications of that? So, just this idea of a culture change. And also, very practically, there's things like, being able to develop new models and views within QlikView itself, which might appeal to, more of your power user. So that's definitely something that needs to be trained.
Yeah, so kind of the takeaway is, help and training need to be delivered within the application, minimally. And
Sure.
I was just at a users group last week, and this came up, and kind of a best practice was maybe in the first tab, you put a definition of what the application is, what the data is, but throughout the application, then don't forget to put the question mark. You click on here, the text description of what's going on. But I think where this best practice, as this client really took it to, was they provided alongside training for their power users, the users who were actually doing the business discovery, who wanted the blank screen to start off with. And by doing that, spending a couple hours with them, it kind of became a win-win, where they enabled these users to, in the analogy, to fish, so they could actually go off and do discovery on their own. And then IT was happy because IT enabled them, so they're not going to have to create all these reports and models for them going forward. So, kind of what you said is, QlikView requires a new way of thinking. It's a cultural change. It's a technology change, but don't overlook the importance of training, even with a tool like QlikView. So now we're halfway over the hump. We're on the back stretch here. Number 6, which is kind of one of my favorites. I kind of wish I would have known, just because QlikView supports massive amounts of data. It really does scale well, but it doesn't mean you should stuff everything into a single QlikView model. Can you?
Yeah, I think this really grew out of my experience with several clients who said, kind of wanted to create this ad hoc application that could answer every question imaginable under the sun. And, in short, this never worked. And that's really because, when you get down to it, you really need, a process of business discovery that's driven by users. So, and it's really, when we think of QlikView, we think of rapid development. We're really talking about rapid development of multiple applications, to answer, multiple questions. And this is not the same thing as, not quite the same thing as enterprise reporting. There is that element of, there's something in addition that's potentially available through data discovery. But generally, what the kinds of problems you see with these, all-in-one data models, just problems with scalability, performance, with these kinds of applications suffer, and just very difficult to manage overall, because, any organization is changing, in multiple places, usually at one time. So.
Yeah, so I kind of look at this kind of as a breadth versus depth type of discussion. QlikView is powerful enough to do the breadth, but you're going to get models like you have there on the right, and you're going to get users. Kind of, we talked about training the last slide. Users who kind of can't understand the model and data because you got so much stuff plugged in there. And then, but really, you should look at it more from a depth perspective, from a functional area perspective. Concentrate on a specific functional area and go deep so you can answer all those questions. So, for the example, sales may need HR, headcount information and employee costs to do what ifs on territory expansion and alignment, but, it doesn't mean that they should plug in all of HR data into their application. So this kind of ties back to a couple points before where, develop an enterprise application or architecture focused on solving functional business issues. So that brings us to number 7, which is, I wish I would have known that QlikView would take off like wildfire and everybody would end up with their own version of the truth.
Yeah, so, I certainly had the experience of assisting clients in their first, project or first dashboard implementation in QlikView, and having that be very successful and build a lot of positive emotion. And, so everybody sees that, everybody, hears about, how quick it went and how easy it is. And so all of a sudden everybody wants to duplicate that success. So you end up with a lot of overlap, a lot of people kind of, working, doing their own thing, developing their own dashboards. So you get a lot of overlap, in terms of data, business logic, the presentation, you're seeing the same thing over and over. And really, in a kind of, worst case scenario, you really were going back to Excel hell of, 15, 20 years ago, whenever that was, when people were showing up in meetings with multiple versions of the same metric and passing theirs off as legitimate or valid. So, there's just a lot of redundancy and a lot of duplication, and, a lot of potential performance issues and things of that nature.
Yeah, kind of takeaway here is kind of begin with the end in mind and implement processes and standards to mitigate this. But, once again, it's kind of would be the death of, a constant theme that's coming out here is, it's an enterprise platform, and you're trying to drive QlikView to become your enterprise platform, kind of kill your momentum or kind of be the death of QlikView if you and I both showed up in the same meeting with our QlikView applications and your version of sales was different than my version of sales, and worse yet, could potentially impact our career if we're, tying our whole both down to the number and then also to the technology and stuff. So, the key here is kind of make sure you manage this and put processes in place so you don't end up with kind of what we showed on my brick wall slide, a bunch of applications with different versions of the truth all hitting a brick wall. So that brings us up to number 8, which is kind of one of my favorites as being in the technology industry for 20 plus years is, information technology, the IT group within an organization is not the devil. And if you look at it from the other side too, from the IT organization, the contrarian is neither are the users. Can you help us out with this one a little bit, Rob?
Well, I think, we're speaking to this, which I've seen, especially with QlikView and especially as things spread, is that, there's this kind of, lack of trust between IT and the business on both sides. And, this is kind of a, why can't we all get along slide, but just, really taking some common sense and saying, hey, this is what IT brings to the table. There's obviously, standards for security, standards for development, all that stuff that's kind of designed to, make, these applications live a while, to keep them around a while, to have them serve their purpose for some time and without, major breakdown. But also, when you think about it, quality assurance, their standards for quality assurance. Nobody can live without those. I mean, they're still so important regardless of what technology you're using. And then, of course, compliance when we talk about, especially for public companies, compliance with, federal laws and SEC laws and things of that nature. The flip side of that is, of course, nothing happens without some kind of business driver, without some kind of, business sponsorship. So really, when you look at that side of the house, it's really, they obviously have the knowledge to define requirements and also the wherewithal to conduct, the value add kind of levels of analysis such as business discovery.
So kind of the takeaway here is it takes a village to deliver these types of enterprise solutions, and the teaming of both IT and users are required. Kind of you said, the IT's got their expertise and the users have their expertise, and you kind of bring them together. I mean, the key here is QlikView is maturing. It's becoming an enterprise platform if it hasn't already achieved that in a lot of organizations, and you should treat it as such. For example, I come across a lot of clients who are still doing their own QlikView upgrades. Without leveraging their information technology group or even an outside services organization. But if you look at these same organizations, they would leverage IT or a services organization to do upgrades of any production or enterprise type of applications. So I think the final key takeaway here, once again, you see it as a theme, is, treat QlikView like any other enterprise type platform. So that brings us to number 9, which is, I wish I would have known that, not to underestimate the complexity of information delivery.
Yeah, so we're really, getting back to the same thing, that's been around for a long time, which is the idea that data is not the same as information. So really we're saying, there might be a great platform for displaying data, but if the data doesn't make sense, then, who cares? Just because it's pretty doesn't mean it's correct. There's a lot of things that have evolved over time, you typically within an organization, but across organizations and across industries as well. So these are ideas like, quality assurance and data validation, all these things, still apply, and they still apply because it's just not that straightforward or easy to implement information or deliver information, from, whatever our source data happens to be.
Yeah, so kind of takeaway here is, like you said, just because it's pre doesn't mean it's correct, or just because it came into QlikView doesn't mean it's correct, or back in the old days from a systems perspective, just because it compiled doesn't mean it will work. So, understand that information delivery projects are complex and require kind of three things: the data, the information, and the business rules. So that takes us to our final one. We've lived through 9 of them. Now we're talking about number 10. The last one I wish I kind of would have known was the steps that are necessary to make QlikView pervasive in any organization or my organization as we go forward.
Right. So this touches on the idea of continuous learning. Like all of us, whether we're within an organization or we're within a consulting group, we're all learning about this. We're all learning, what are the best practices for making this better. So it's kind of like we need a structure to, sort of collect those lessons learned and also disseminate the best practices in a way that's, of maximum use or reuse, to our clients, to our colleagues, and within our organization. Typically, people are finding that, setting up a center of excellence, or what we call a competency center, is very useful. And so, this is just talking about it. This is a great structure for engaging in this process of continuous learning and being able to leverage that learning.
Yeah, so kind of the takeaway is, if you kind of look at this graphic, this is actually a QlikView views kind of a center of excellence across 5 pillars of development, deployment, administration, scalability, and strategy. If you kind of address all 5 of those, you're going to implement best practices throughout your organization to make sure that QlikView becomes an enterprise standard or pervasive across your organization. A lot of our clients have business intelligence competency centers. You should take those same types of concepts and then roll them out throughout the QlikView community as well. So we survived all 10. A little bit of a road here. Here's a summary. We're not going to review them all. This is just so you have them all in one place, kind of as a reminder. And the takeaway here is, you may experience more or less of this list in your organization than we've seen. And it's a lot to cover. I mean, in 45 minutes to go into each one of these, we could spend a couple hours talking on, and, to address a data architecture may be a couple month or a couple weeks, couple month engagement within an organization to figure it out. Actually, it's an ongoing, most organizations see it. So the key here is that to understand that we're all in this together, and I think we can all learn from each other. So, Rob, now that we know that, what we wanted to know before we started type of thing, what's next?
Well, I think, this presentation was intended as a framework for, building success with QlikView at an enterprise level, or as we mature to an enterprise level. So, the first thing I would recommend is really conducting an assessment of, where people stand in terms of, the 10 things. And that's really getting to, why don't you scorecard where you are on the 10 things and kind of identify the gaps between, what is an ideal level versus where we are in terms of the business, also in terms of the technology. For instance, many folks have found it useful to leverage QlikView's, new governance dashboard, if you're familiar with that, and start making plans. You might have to make some short-term, kind of immediate things that you need to do to sort of right the ship, but also, what are some long-term plans, for moving in the direction of successful, getting the maximum value out of QlikView.
So, kind of the benefits, and I think I mentioned before, kind of the theme across all 10 of these is, QlikView is a powerful enterprise platform, and kind of treated as such. A lot of the concepts that we talked about have been around for a while. Apply those to your QlikView enterprise implementations, and then the other key is here is, leverage the expertise of others who've been there before. I mean, there's no reason why you should be trying to reinvent the wheel on a lot of these types of things. And then finally, don't be afraid to ask for help. And then I think the final takeaway here is, I mentioned kind of don't be afraid to help and leverage expertise. ClearLine as an organization, we have the expertise and experience in leveraging and delivering these enterprise type of QlikView applications, and we can help you maximize your investment in QlikView. So your final takeaway is, ClearLine Group should be your clear choice for QlikView services. With that, I'll open up the lines here for question and answer. Rob and I will do some question and answer, and we'll go from there. Well, thank you for all those great questions. As a summary here, once again, my name was John Schmid from the ClearLine Group, jschmid@clearlinegroup.com, and Rob Wozniak, also from the ClearLine Group, at rwozniak@clearlinegroup.com. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, just email us. We'll be happy to help you out here. Once again, this webinar is being recorded and will be on our website at www.clearlinegroup.com. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and have a wonderful day.